Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 360 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where, well, the chief obstacles to an easy conquest of Rohan were almost certainly not me and Matt.
I don't think Wormtongue would need to bother discrediting us with Théoden, though, because I think we've done a good job of it ourselves,
We
honestly.
probably have, that's fair.
Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm Matt, the Nerd of the Rings, and I'm here with the Man of the West, to whom the loyalty of many remains steadfast, even in his apparent dotage. Alan Sisto.
Well, at least folks are going to know who poisoned me when the day comes. Matt. Folks, join us as Saruman puts out a contract for Théodred as we continue our move forward in time from Cirion and Eorl, while keeping our focus on Rohan in a 3-episode look at the battles of the Fords of Isen in Unfinished Tales.
I'm really excited about this one.
It's going to be fun.
Now, folks, no matter how you arrived, you're all welcome here in the common room. At the Prancing Pony podcast, we are reading and talking our way through Middle-earth with plenty of speculation and bad jokes along the way.
Now, of course, we still love our deep dives into the lore, discussing our favorite themes, and a whole lot more.
But we try to keep it light and fun, like a couple friends chatting at the pub, and we're glad you've joined us.
I'm sure you're going to be glad you joined as well. But before we get to tonight's chapter discussion, it's time to stop over and have a chat with a visitor in the North Wing. And today we're bringing you another new installment of The North Wing.
Barlam and Butterbur had a room or two in the North Wing at the Prancing Pony Inn, made special for hobbits. And this is our place, made special for some of our listeners, to give us a chance to get to know them.
Sans weird accents, though. We don't.
Oh, you don't want me to do the accent?
No, I meant our guests. You can do all the accents you want.
Oh, okay. Okay, fair enough.
Rooms at the North Wing, though, are hard to come by, folks, so only our patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium and Círdan's Contribution tiers are eligible. So if you'd like to be one of the next patrons to join us, be sure to check out patreon.com/prancingponypod.
Please do. We've got a waiting list for the North Wing right now, but we'll get to them all soon, and we'll make room for more if necessary.
Well, then, why don't we go ahead and welcome tonight's guest to the North Wing, Erica Bow.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Erica. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You've listened to these segments before. You know what we're going to ask. Where are you from? What do you do? And what do your loved ones think of all this Tolkien stuff you're into?
Well, my dad I'm from the Texas area. Grew up, born, raised in Texas.
All right.
Retired Air Force, now being a federal government, helping out with the Air Force again. As for my family, my late mom was the one who got me into Tolkien and reading. And my brother and a couple of nephews are interested, so I'm still trying to work on the younger nephews. My dad tolerates it, but he's more of a Westerns.
Okay. All right. Well, you could just kind of rephrase The Lord of the Rings and sort of give Aragorn a little bit of a drawl. We were thinking about, weren't we, Matt, about giving Éomer a sort of a John Wayne sort of drawl. I mean,
well, and we had the Southrons.
The Southrons. Oh, yeah, the Southrons. We could have them Southrons. All right, Matt, you've got a question up next.
Yeah, so the question we ask everyone who comes to the Prancing Pony: when and how did you first discover Tolkien's works, and what was your experience like? Why does it keep bringing you back?
Well, my earliest memory is the animated Hobbit.
Mm.
Yeah, I didn't
one.
start reading the books until junior high. That was my elementary school. The librarian was more of a, you're in the first grade, you stay in the shelf. And my mom was always, summertime, we were enrolled in the summer reading at the library, and that's what we did. And I was always ahead of everybody else because Mom had us reading.
Yeah. And what keeps you coming back then to Middle Earth? I mean, that was presumably a very long time ago.
Yeah. For me, it's, it's a good place to, okay, world's getting too much. Time to go back to Middle Earth. I play a Lotro. That's my, all right, I'll get frustrated at work. My mom was still alive. So what we're going to do? I'm going to kill some trolls. Yeah.
Troll killing is always a useful thing. All right. Well, which is your favorite book in the Legendarium and why? And then if you have a favorite non-Legendarium book, what is it and why?
Well, in the Legendarium, mine would probably be The Hobbit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I do enjoy it. Because many times I do feel like Bilbo when somebody knocks on the door and I'm trying to eat. And
That's a good reason why you like that. I like that.
my favorite non-legendarian was Rohirrim.
Roverandom. Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because I just finished reading it, a few weeks before my mom suddenly passed, and so it has a special.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I mean, you're reading it at that time, at a time of tragedy, and so it's going to stick with you. It's a really interesting work, too.
Yeah.
Do you have any Tolkien goals you'd like to share, whether it's tracking down a special book for your collection or going to a moot or whatever it may be? Do you have any Tolkien goals?
Well, one of my goals is one day to make it over to Oxford Moot in person.
Yes. That's a good goal to have.
The past 2 years, I've been an online steward for Oxford Moot. But I like to be in the same time zone.
That would be nice.
2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite an event, and definitely the kind of thing that any Tolkien fan should try to attend at least once. All right, well, it's time for a lightning round of quick questions and answers. All right, Erica, what's your favorite scene or moment in the Legendarium?
My favorite scene would be when Frodo wakes up in Minas Tirith and sees Aragorn. And sees everybody he thought were gone.
Yeah.
And they've showed up on him.
Yep, the Field of Cormallen there, where he's like, wait a minute, you all are supposed to be dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Now, you might have played your hand a little bit with your earlier answer about favorite book, but who is your favorite Hobbit?
My favorite Hobbit would be Sam.
Ooh, Matt thought it was going to be Bilbo. I could see that on his face.
I think it was going to be Bilbo. Yeah.
Sam's a good choice. All right, here's an easy one. Well, easy one if you know us. Balrog wings, actual or metaphorical?
Metaphorical.
Thank you. You get to stay.
It's a good one. Favorite poem or song in the Legendarium?
Well, my favorite poem is The Road Goes Ever On.
Love that one. Favorite author or book other than Tolkien?
C.S. Lewis.
Good choice. Matt, you've got one more?
Yep. One last question for you. What's the one place in Middle-earth that you wish you could visit?
Rivendell.
You know, once again, you surprised me. I thought you were going to say the Shire for sure.
I want to go to Elrond's library.
Yeah, I think everybody does. That's certainly on the bucket list for all the Middle-earth visitors. All right. Well, those are some great answers. Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we've enjoyed having you here in the North Wing, but it is time for all of us to head back over to the common room to join the rest of the listeners.
Thanks again, and we'll see you back at our next Questions After Nightfall, if not sooner.
And now we return you to the podcast in progress.
Always great to chat over in the North Wing, but it's time to get to the text. Alan, take it away with the first reading.
All right. The chief obstacles to an easy conquest of Rohan by Saruman were Théodred and Éomer. Like we said, it's not us. They were vigorous men devoted to the king and high in his affections, as his only son and his sister's son. And they did all that they could to thwart the influence over him that Grima gained when the king's health began to fail. This occurred early in the year 3014, when Théoden was 66. His malady may thus have been due to natural causes, though the Rohirrim commonly lived till near or beyond their 80th year. But it may well have been induced or increased by subtle poisons administered by Grima. In any case, Théoden's sense of weakness and dependence on Grima was largely due to the cunning and skill of this evil counselor's suggestions. It was his policy to bring his chief opponents into discredit with Théoden, and if possible, to get rid of them. It proved impossible to set them at odds with one another. Théoden, before his sickness, had been much loved by all his kin and people, and the loyalty of Théodred and Éomer remained steadfast, even in his apparent dotage. Éomer also was not an ambitious man, and his love and respect for Théodred, 13 years older than he, was only second to his love of his foster father. Grima, therefore, tried to play them one against the other in the mind of Théoden, representing Éomer as ever eager to increase his own authority and to act without consulting the king or his heir. In this he had some success, which bore fruit when Saruman at last succeeded in achieving the death of Théodred. It was clearly seen in Rohan, when the true accounts of the battles at the fords were known, that Saruman had given special orders that Théodred should at all costs be slain. At the first battle, all his fiercest warriors were engaged in reckless assaults upon Théodred and his guard, disregarding other events of the battle, which might otherwise have resulted in a much more damaging defeat for the Rohirrim. When Théodred was at last slain, Saruman's commander, no doubt under orders, seemed satisfied for the time being, and Saruman made the mistake, fatal as it proved, of not immediately throwing in more forces and proceeding at once to a massive invasion of Westfold, though the valor of Grimbold and Elfhelm contributed to this delay. If the invasion of Westfold had begun 5 days earlier, there can be little doubt that the reinforcements from Edoras would never have come near Helm's Deep, but would have been surrounded and overwhelmed in the open plain, if indeed Edoras had not itself been attacked and captured before the arrival of Gandalf.
So we start out with a clear indication that not only is Saruman seeking to conquer Rohan, but that the two people standing in its way were Théodred, son and heir to King Théoden, and Éomer.
That's right. Now, a quick reminder, folks, that here at the time of the first battle of the Fords of Isen, Théodred is 41 years old. That's quite a bit older than the way they portrayed him in the Jackson films. And Éomer is only 28. And also, because it's what we do, a quick bit of word nerdery on Théodred's name. We've talked repeatedly about the Théod element, meaning people, as in Théoden. And that's what it means here, people. But the second element, red, means counsel or advice, like we see in Ethelred the Unready. Unread meaning evil counsel or no counsel, which was a pun on his name that meant noble counsel. So this is like the counsel of the people.
And while the text tells us shortly that Éomer loved and respected Théodred more than anyone other than Théoden himself, maybe we should do a quick sidebar to see how that came to be.
I think we should. And for that, Matt, I'm going to have you take us back to a passage in Appendix A3, that's the House of Eorl, that you and I actually skipped when we covered this section in episode 353. Go ahead.
In 2989, Théoden married Éomund of Eastfold, the chief marshal of the Mark. Her son Éomer was born in 2991, and her daughter Éowyn in 2995. At that time, Sauron had arisen again, and the shadow of Mordor reached out to Rohan. Orcs began to raid the eastern regions and slay or steal horses. Others also came down from the Misty Mountains, many being great Uruks in the service of Saruman, though it was long before that was suspected. Éomund's chief charge lay in the East Marches, and he was a great lover of horses and hater of orcs. If news came of a raid, he would often ride against them in hot anger, unwarily and with few men. Thus it came about that he was slain in 3002, for he pursued a small band to the borders of the Emyn Muil, and was there surprised by a strong force that lay in wait in the rocks. Not long after, Théoden took sick and died to the great grief of the king. Her children he took into his house, calling them son and daughter. He had only one child of his own, Théodred his son, then 24 years old. For the queen Elfhild had died in childbirth, and Théoden did not wed again. Éomer and Éowyn grew up at Edoras, and saw the dark shadow fall on the halls of Théoden.
All right, well, we need to start with Théoden when we're talking about this situation. And folks, if you don't recall, or it wasn't clear in that passage, Théoden was Théoden's sister. And we read about that a little in the entry for Thengel. That was Théoden's father, that he didn't get married until he was 38, that is Thengel. And that marriage was to Morwen of Losarnoch. She was 21. They met in Gondor, which was where Thengel was living, thanks to his dad being kind of an idiot. And they had 3 kids together while they were there.
Théoden was the second of those kids and the only son. He was born in 2948, and when he was just 5 years old, his grandfather, Thengel, the previously mentioned jerk, died, and his father was recalled to Rohan to succeed to the throne. And yes, we read that he returned unwillingly, but he proved a good and wise king.
That's right. Now, he and Morwen had 2 more daughters, and while we don't know when the first of those 2 was born, we know that Théoden, the youngest, was born in 2963.
Yeah, she's described as the child of Thengel's age, as he was 58 when she was born. Théoden was 15 when his baby sister was born.
So I kind of want you to put yourself in Théoden's shoes. He's the second of 5 children, but all 4 of his siblings are sisters. He spent the first 5 years of his life in Gondor with his Gondorian mother and, of course, his dad, the heir to the throne of Rohan. It's a very different life than I think we imagined the Théoden of the films. I mean, he's got a softer side to him because he grew up with 4 sisters. How do you not? You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, even in the films, I feel like that comes across
a little bit
really well
true.
with particularly, I'm thinking of the moment where he says "no more despair" to Éowyn before they leave Dunharrow.
Oh, my heart, man! Yeah,
yeah. You know, and I've never made this connection before until we actually just talked about it here. But I feel like that affinity, that affection that he has for Théoden, who's his youngest sister, much younger than him,
much younger, 15 years old when your baby sister's born. You're going to feel super protective. You know, there's going to be a real, just a love there.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, I mean, my youngest sister is 12 years younger than me. And like,
oh, wow. Okay. It's almost a paternal role, isn't it? I mean,
it's like an extra parent in a way.
Yeah.
And so, especially when they're young, you know, you really take on that protective role and everything. And I feel like, you know, this is the point that I said I never really made that connection before, but I feel like that kind of transfers to Éowyn a bit. You know, this love that he has for Théoden and then taking care of her daughter.
And her son, even. I mean, it's a different relationship between him and Éomer, but it's especially with the daughter, right? Yeah, I agree.
I think they've got an extra special bond there.
I think so.
Dearer than daughter is the line that always gets me.
Such a great phrase. I love that.
Yeah, so then 10 years after you've returned to the land of your father's birth, but not yours, your baby sister's born. And so it's no wonder the appendix says her brother loved her dearly.
Exactly. And I feel like that explains why when his baby sister dies of grief at 39 after the death of her husband, he was also one of Théoden's top marshals, so would have been very close to him as well. Théoden took her children in as his own son and daughter. Éomer then being 11 and Éowyn only 7. And I feel like there's even more emotional depth to that when you remember what we just read in this passage, Matt, that while Théoden's own son Théodred is 24, I mean, Théoden's an empty nester. His son's 24.
Yeah.
And now he's all of a sudden got an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. That's a radical change in the way you're running your household. But here's the thing. He couldn't have had more children because his wife died in childbirth.
Yeah.
So, man, that's hard. That hits, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, you know, obviously we find out that Théoden grew up in a large family.
Yeah.
But only had one child. He clearly loved his sister dearly. And, you know, the math is kind of mathing out.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Théoden is clearly one of those guys who comes from a large family and doesn't mind a large family. Not the kind that, like, is in a large family and says, I'm never having more than kids, one. Or I'm having one, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so he's on board. And I think we both have adopted children. And so, like, this story is so close to my heart, like, with Théoden adopting Éomer and Éowyn and the way he treats them, like, as son and daughter. And, like, it's one of those, like, I don't know if Tolkien intended it this way, but it's so true in that, like, you don't see them as anything else than your son and daughter. And that's the 100%. Way Théoden treats them. And I love that.
I love it too. And I think also, you know, as an older adoptive parent, I feel that too, right? Let's see, Théoden doing the math is 54 when he brings in this 11-year-old and 7-year-old as his kids. And yeah, I mean, I'm a little older than that, and my kids are 12 and 10 and about to be 13 and 11. So yeah, it's an interesting comparison. And I really feel for Théoden here, and it gives us a little more insight into how much he loved Éomer and Éowyn. But I think it also, coming back to where we're at in the story with Théodred, the son, and Éomer, let's remember that unlike in the films, there is a pretty big age gap between these two.
Yes.
Théodred is 13 years older than Éomer at the time that he's actually 13 years older the rest of his life. But at the time Éomer comes in as 11, Théodred's 24, right? Éomer has just lost his father. He's been adopted by the king, who's older, but naturally he's going to look up to his cousin, right? You talked about that that age gap being almost a parental role. Théodred's 24 years old, and he's got an 11-year-old brother and a 7-year-old sister. Yeah. He's going to take on that role.
It's very similar.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And with all that as background, let's return to the text that describes both these men as vigorous, devoted to the king, and high in his affections.
Understandably so, right?
Yeah. And it's going to prove difficult to influence Théoden with these two around, and yet influence is precisely what's going on with Grima.
That's right. Now, again, with the very direct mention here, remember, this that we're reading is written as a chronicle, as a history later on. The writer is going to assume that the reader would have the basic knowledge of the core facts, that Saruman sought to conquer Rohan, and that Wormtongue was his tool in attempting to influence Théoden. So there's not a lot of story here to build either of those elements up. It's just as given,
Speaking of Wormtongue, we get a very clear mention of when his influence began, early in 3014. And that's a little more than 5 years before the time Gandalf and the three hunters show up in the Two Towers.
Yep. And since time has now passed since he has brought the kids in, I want to give you the relevant ages at this point. Théoden is now 66, right? That we talk about his maybe being related to his old age, but probably not because they typically live a little longer. That means Éomer is 23, Éowyn is 19, and Théodred is 36. So by this point, Éomer and Théodred have effectively been brothers for 10 years.
Now, we're also given the interesting possibility that Théoden's malady could have been simply due to his getting older.
Now, I'm hearing a joke in there.
I was going to say, I can think of no better person to discuss this with than Alan. So,
wow, thank you.
Alan, let's dive into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that the chronicler does give us the possibility of this. So how does the chronicler phrase this? He says something about his malady may thus have been due to natural causes. And then later says, but it may well have been induced or increased. And later he actually phrases sickness with air quotes. So I feel like there is this strong leaning towards the assumption that it was not a malady of his old age, but was in fact related to Grima. And not necessarily just physical poisons, but the psychological poison, the mental draining that his presence would have. But I mean, look, I think it's not out of the question for somebody in their mid-60s to already be suffering a little bit and to be struggling and to be able to be influenced so readily by somebody who has his ear.
I think that's the thing is like, the combination of, maybe age, maybe he's a little less, sharp, you could say, and more susceptible, maybe. Like, you can't figure out how to use the iPhone, the iPhone
how to use the iPhone or the TV remote.
How to, or the TV remote, or it's like, my internet's not working. It's like, well, did you plug it in?
I was going to make a joke about the cup holder on the PC, but I don't think anybody even has any CD-ROM drives anymore. So the joke doesn't even work. No,
it doesn't. Yeah. But I think, Grima's obviously someone who's already earned some measure of trust.
Yes.
And then I think it's just kind of this perfect.
He wasn't Wormtongue when he applied for the job. Let's put it that way.
Right. Yeah. And then,
that's the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, you factor in the poisons and like old person with poisons, just naturally, that doesn't sound like a good combination.
No, very bad combination. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Sure, it could be in part due to that. Certainly that would make him more susceptible, one would think. I mentioned earlier the fact that he didn't have his wife around anymore. I think that actually is significant when you have, your partner who knows you and has known you for, in this case, they would have known each other for, 40 plus years. I feel like she would have been a balancing, figure in relation to Wormtongue. It would have prevented a lot of that. But, he's on his own, really, effectively. Éomer's out there doing a job. Éowyn's 19 at this point, so she hasn't been able to really, wield enough influence. But I feel like maybe the malady isn't due to his age so much as it is that his age makes him a little more susceptible to it. So,
right. Yeah.
Well, before we're given the more likely culprit, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
We're like, maybe it was due to a sickness and age, but then we get, but it's probably the subtle poisons provided by
It might have
Wormtongue,
had something to do with the poisons.
Whatever the cause, right? Causation, correlation, we don't know. The king was actually dependent upon Grima by this point, thanks to Wormtongue's cunning. And again, I just want to point this out. Wormtongue was not the name on his resume when he applied.
Right.
He like you said, had earned a level of trust before he became a betrayer to Théoden in order to benefit Saruman.
Yeah. And one of the things that Grima had been successful in doing so far was to discredit his enemies in the eyes of Théoden.
I love that, or better yet, just get rid of them.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I think we know what that means.
Tomato,
Exactly. Yeah, discredit, kill, whatever it takes. Exile at the very least. But that was proving far more difficult to do with these two. Of course. I mean, they're both loyal to their father, adoptive father, even in his apparent dotage. And yes, I know, Matt, you're warming up a joke right now.
I would never. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm sure you would never.
Moving on here. What do you make of the line before his sickness? Théoden had been much loved. Does that mean that during his sickness he wasn't?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Had been much loved.
Had been much loved. That's exactly what it says, right? I mean, when we look at this sickness, Théoden before his sickness had been much loved by all his kin and people. Though we do read then the loyalty of Théodred and Éomer remained steadfast. That suggests maybe not everybody's loyalty had remained steadfast.
Yeah, right.
Maybe Grima was a little more successful in getting some of the people to maybe not look up to Théoden anymore. Maybe hard to if he's really under the control of Wormtongue. The average person is going to be like, it's just Wormtongue. He's just a puppet now.
Yeah. And I mean, you could easily see how going alongside this would be like a tendency to be more reclusive.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe he's not the king of the people that he once was. And so
that's fair.
Yeah. But no, I totally, I mean, that's what the text is implying here.
That's true. It really is.
Yeah.
During his sickness, he must have lost a little bit of that support of the people.
That respect. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine he probably felt, a little bit of a lack of self-respect. I'm sure he, in his more lucid moments, would have wondered why he was falling apart so quickly. And seeing that decline, the people would find themselves being a little bit less, not so much loyal. It's not that we're going to become disloyal and flip to Saruman, but they weren't going to be as, Théoden, that's great.
They talk more about old Théoden. Like the Théoden. You remember how awesome Théoden was?
That's right.
Yeah.
This is a what have you done for me lately sort of people, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to the text, we find that, Éomer simply doesn't have the ambition when it comes to Wormtongue trying to divide him. Combined with his love and respect, not just for King Théoden, but for his brother. I mean, Théodred is essentially his brother.
Yeah.
That meant that Wormtongue is running into trouble. He's not getting traction on this plan to divide them.
He's not going to be able to get Théodred and Éomer to get at each other's throats. Instead, since he can't set them against each other in real life, he's just going to try to set them against each other in the mind of the king.
Right.
After all, it's really Théoden's opinion that matters anyway. This is a monarchy and not a democracy. Yeah. So he starts portraying Éomer as trying to gain power and this sort of ability to act independently of either Théoden or Théodred.
Yeah, which is an interesting ploy in that Éomer himself does have a high rank. He's the third marshal of the Riddermark, although it is Théodred who's the second marshal.
That's true. The king, of course, is actually the one who technically serves as the first marshal, but we're going to cover that whole marshal thing in a couple of weeks. The appendix to the Battles of the Fords of Isen spends a lot of time talking about the structure of the way that the marshals are organized. So we'll cover that then.
Yeah. Marshal or not, he's still subordinate to Théodred and Théoden. So Wormtongue's angle here is to cast him as insubordinate.
That's right.
And forebodingly, the text says that this effort had some success, which was seen after Saruman managed to get Théodred killed.
Mm-hmm. Wonder what that success looked like. Is it just the fact that he got Théodred killed? I mean, I don't know how. I mean, I suppose maybe after Théodred's death, it's easier now to pit Éomer against a non-existent person. Like, now see, look, now he's going to try to fill this power vacuum.
Yeah. When it says had some success, I could see that just making some traction in Théoden's mind,
Yeah, maybe.
Like Théoden gets to be, more paranoid about like, oh, is Éomer plotting my demise? And
now that Théodred's dead, does he think he's going to be my heir? And yeah. That's a good point.
Which he is.
Like, right. I mean, that's the whole point. Éomer is the next in line if Théodred dies.
Is it saying that this had some success after Théodred's death, or is it just saying, or is that just when we're told about it?
That's the thing. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that maybe this had some traction prior to Théodred's death.
I think it might have. I mean, if you look at the phrasing that it uses in the text, it says, in this he had some success, which bore fruit when Saruman at last succeeded in achieving the death of Théodred. So yeah, there was some success prior to that death. What would that success have looked like?
Yeah. And then, obviously, I think the way that Théoden treats Éomer in The Lord of the Rings, we see there's a bit more, I don't know, this undertone of animosity. Like, obviously, he comes back and, when the three hunters return to Edoras and Théoden is healed, Éomer's in jail.
Yeah. He's in jail. That's right. I nearly forgotten that. Right. Yeah.
Which, yes, he disobeyed orders, but they were crappy orders to begin with.
They were Wormtongue's orders. Yeah. I wonder, you mentioned that. And one of the reasons he was out there was, I mean, okay, that is the area that he's the marshal over. Let's be honest. He's responsible for the east side. But, I find his absence at the battles of the Fords of Isen very significant. And I wonder, I mean, yes, they eventually call for those reinforcements, but you'd think that maybe since you've got the first and, well, not the first and second, but you've got Théodred, and then you've got Elfhelm and you've got Grimbold. Where is Éomer? Where was Éomer when the Fords fell? No, I mean, we know he was out doing his job in the Eastfold, but you wonder if maybe part of the reason that he was out there was because Wormtongue wanted to keep them apart.
Oh, yeah.
And that would have been some of the success. Like, might Théodred have had a harder time getting killed if Éomer had been present? Yeah. So, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, what if? I guess we could always speculate on that in the P5. Like, what if Éomer had been there,
Yeah.
But now that we have some background in the text, we get into the actual prelude to the first battle, and we read that after the battles, historians determined that Saruman had ordered the death of Théodred at all costs. Now, as we see later in Helm's Deep, I say later chronologically, but it's about, 3 seasons ago, Saruman's short-sightedness will prove to be his disadvantage. And I think we're going to talk about that in a couple of episodes with a special friend of the podcast.
So this, at all costs, looks just like you think it would. Elite soldiers being tasked with killing Théodred and ignoring everything else going on in the battle.
I know, exactly. You have one job to do, but, had you actually just treated this like, a battle instead of a really complicated murder, you might actually have inflicted more damage on Rohan. Yeah.
And we also read that it was Saruman's commander, no doubt under his orders, who hesitated after killing Théodred. Again, at Helm's Deep, his failure to be present at the battle leads to a strong disadvantage.
That's a very good point. I mean, had he been present to kind of take into consideration the strategic and tactical circumstances, might he have said, let's commit all the troops, let's go, right? Whatever the case, this hesitation, the text says, proved fatal. Now, how is this? Well, today, that's the day of the first battle of the Fords of Isen, is February 25th. To connect you to what else is going on, the company are now camping at Parthgallen. The breaking of the fellowship takes place tomorrow. Saruman ends up waiting until March 2nd to attack the Fords again. That's when he defeats Erkenbrand, and he reaches Helm's Deep on March 3rd. Remember, there are 30 days in February in this calendar.
Now, had they invaded the Westfold from here on this day, the war with Rohan is already over. Soldiers from Edoras could never have made it in time. In fact, the text suggests that not only would those reinforcements likely have been defeated on the open plain, vastly superior numbers, recall, the capital itself might have been reached and captured before Gandalf even shows up on March 2nd.
Wow, that changes the whole story, doesn't it? I mean,
yes,
it changes
very much so.
Everything. Now, keep in mind that it took 2 days alone for the news of Théodred's death to reach Edoras in the first place. The battle takes place on February 25th, news reaching Edoras on February 27th, as Wormtongue points out to Gandalf on March 2nd. It is not yet 5 days since the bitter tidings came that Théodred, your son, was slain upon the West Marches, your right hand, second marshal of the Mark.
And we shouldn't underestimate Gandalf's importance here. Without his arrival, Théoden is never healed and likely defeated anyway.
That's a very good point. I mean, there's no doubt that Théoden, as he is before Gandalf's arrival and the healing of Théoden, is not going to be able to successfully defend against an attack from Saruman. I mean, it is all over but the crying at that point. But I want to talk about Gandalf's earlier arrival for a minute. We all know he shows up on March 2nd with Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas. He heals Théoden, and everything begins to turn around. That's great. But what about before? And for this, we're going to go to the Lord of the Rings Reader's Companion from Hammond and Skull. In their notes for the chapter, The Council of Elrond, they're talking about when Gandalf is discussing how he came into possession of one Shadowfax, you know? They give us a really long passage with some great detail, not just about Gandalf and Shadowfax, but about a character we know is very important here, but we don't get a lot on him, mostly because he's about to die, Théodred.
Yeah, Hammond and Skull say that this is probably the latest manuscript among the Hunt for the Ring papers, marked official and final, and that it gives us this account. Gandalf escapes night of 1718, that's September 17th or 18th of 3018. Gandalf cannot descend on an eagle before the gates of Edoras, and in any case has to avoid the pursuit of Saruman. He is set down, therefore, by Gwaihir in the foothills of the White Mountains at dawn on September 18th, west of Edoras. And he does not come to Edoras until September 19th, in a beggarly guise on foot.
Okay, so far so good. That tracks precisely with what the Tale of Years tells us in Appendix B. But while we're there, we also read that Gandalf gained entrance to Edoras the next day, September 20th. Again, we're 3018, the year before. That's when Théoden commanded him to go, told him to take any horse. But here we get more detail. Yes, he gets that meeting with Théoden on September 20th, but it's in this manuscript we learn Wormtongue, secretly in Saruman's service and with great influence over the king, is absent for some reason, and Théodred is more favorable to Gandalf. So Théoden is troubled, but will not make up his mind.
Instead, he pushes the decision to the next day. Of course, Wormtongue reappears, and now Théoden tells Gandalf to be gone next morning. Wormtongue sends a message to Saruman, but A, Gandalf knows, and B, he also knows it won't get to him in time.
And that's when we read this. Gandalf says that this is ill treatment which Théoden will rue. He does not understand the urgency of the times. He mentions the dreadful rumors of the passage of the Black Riders, which have terrified Rohan. Now, said Gandalf, if no one else dare oppose these evil things, I dare, but not on foot. One might look for aid in such business from a great king, Lord of Horses.
And that's when we get the take any horse, just get out of here bit. We read that after the king says this, the willingness to give Gandalf a horse is much to the dislike of Wormtongue, but Théoden is reluctant to take back his word.
And that's when our hero Théodred pops up again in the manuscript. Théodred opposes Wormtongue, saying that a king cannot take back his word even to a beggar, but that for his part, he thinks more honor and heed should be paid to Gandalf Greyhaim. Théodred rocks. I love that. And he clearly knows what's up. He's sort of the Faramir of Rohan right here.
Oh, that's a fun way to look at it.
I really like it. I mean, he's a wizard's pupil. He really admires Gandalf and is like, Dad, I know you don't think this guy's so great because Wormtongue says he's not, but trust me, Gandalf's the guy. You need to listen to him.
Yeah.
And it just makes me so sad that he ends up being killed. And we don't really get to know him at all, do we?
We don't. That's it's unfortunate. We don't get to know him. But here we are 5 months later. And while we get to Gandalf's return to Edoras, for now, we go back to the text and a really fun little what if, which, that's part of the job here. Yeah.
We do. I mean, Tolkien doing a what if is not cool. Like,
yeah.
No. That's our job.
He does a lot of what ifs in the letters, and
that's true. Oh, the letters are amazing for that. I love
it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's see what we've got here in the footnote.
All right. Well, after rightly telling us that not pushing into the Westfold with a full invasion after Théodred's death on February 25th was a mistake, Tolkien observes that this leaves the Ents out of account. But hey, everybody leaves the Ents out of account except for Gandalf.
So what would have happened if there had been an invasion and Gandalf was able to bring about the rising of the Ents? Well, he couldn't have done it before now, so let's speculate. What if he'd stirred the Ents into action after a full invasion of Rohan on February 25th?
I love this. I love how Tolkien's like, okay, what if the Ents did get stirred to action?
Right.
Or I'm sorry, but what if they got stirred to action, but it was after this invasion had taken place, right? Saruman and his forces come in. Can the Ents do anything to stop the damage? Let's find out.
Tolkien writes, the Ents might have destroyed Isengard and even captured Saruman, if after victory he had not himself followed his army. The Ents and Huorns, with the aid of such riders of the Eastmark as had not yet been engaged, might have destroyed the forces of Saruman in Rohan, but the mark would have been in ruins and leaderless.
In other words, no, we really need to make sure this gets stopped now. I love this. This speculation, this hypothetical is certainly bad news for Rohan, but of course, it's much worse news for Gondor, as Tolkien continues in the footnote. He writes, even if the Red Arrow had found anyone with authority to receive it, the call from Gondor would not have been heeded, or at most, a few companies of weary men would have reached Minas Tirith, too late, except to perish with it. Wow.
Yeah.
I love how all of these little threads are so dependent on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that Saruman's delay, his strategic mistake in not pushing in on February 25th, is literally what saves Gondor and enables Aragorn to be king. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great comparison in that, Saruman delays, whereas Sauron,
his problem is the other way around, isn't it?
Yeah. That Gandalf and the others are able to do is force him to act too early.
Yep.
And so you've got both sides here. And I just love how, this is, like we said, this is Tolkien doing a what if, and we get such poetic writing here as too late except to perish with it. Like, it's such a great line.
It is.
And this is a footnote. Like, man, the man is the king, What can you say?
He's so good at it. Yep.
Now, finally, we get a mention that this delay by Saruman's commander, besides being under orders, most likely, was caused in part by the valor of Grimbold and Elfhelm.
In fact, the text essentially repeats itself about their valor, suggesting that the chronicle as written perhaps underestimates the importance of those two. Now, we, on the other hand, are not going to underestimate their importance, but we're not going to be talking about them until later this episode. Now, soon we're going to get back to Saruman's overly complicated hit on Théodred, but before we do, we want to remind you there's a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony podcast than just us.
The PPP has an amazing listener community. They're always coming up with great questions and discussions across all our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
On Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony podcast. Follow the page to get news, but you're going to want to join the group to get involved in some great discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod. On Twitter and Instagram, we're simply at PrancingPonyPod.
And hey, if you want daily Tolkien content, please check out Today's Tolkien Times on YouTube and all your favorite podcast apps. It's my short format daily show with everything from Middle-earth Map Mondays to Silmarillion Saturdays. Be sure to check it out at youtube.com/@TolkienTimes and follow @TolkienTimes on all your social media. Matt, would you go ahead and pick up? We're going to learn a little bit about just why the Fords are so important.
All right. Only here, south of Isengard, was it possible for large forces, especially those heavily armed or mounted, to cross the river. Saruman thus had this advantage. He could send his troops down either side of the Isen and attack the Fords, if they were held against him, from both sides. Any force of his west of Isen could, if necessary, retreat upon Isengard. On the other hand, Théodred might send men across the fords, either in sufficient strength to engage Saruman's troops or to defend the western bridgehead. But if they were worsted, they would have no retreat except back over the fords with the enemy at their heels, and possibly also awaiting them on the eastern bank. South and west along the Isen they had no way home, unless they were provisioned for a long journey into western Gondor. Saruman's attack was not unforeseen, but it came sooner than was expected. Théodred's scouts had warned him of a mustering of troops before the gates of Isengard, mainly, as it seemed, on the west side of Isen. He therefore manned the approaches, east and west, to the fords with sturdy men on foot from the levies of Westfold, leaving 3 companies of riders together with horse herds and spare mounts on the east bank. He himself passed over with the main strength of his cavalry, 8 companies and a company of archers, intending to overthrow Saruman's army before it was fully prepared. But Saruman had not revealed his intentions nor the full strength of his forces.
All right. Well, now that we're going from the historian's sort of pre-analysis of, now that we know all these things that have happened, now we get to the actual story. So it's sort of like we've got this Monday morning quarterbacking out of the way.
Hold up, Alan. I think we're going to need to explain this to the rest of the world, and maybe even to our American listeners who don't know sports ball things. Do we need to translate this?
I think we do. I'll give you kind of the TLDR version. So American football games, we still call it football. Don't try to make me call it anything else.
It's football.
American football games are typically played on Sundays. Quarterbacks are the players most responsible for their team's offensive performance, right? They're the ones who decide who to throw the ball to. They often call plays. So when fans and analysts look at a team's performance on Sunday, second guessing the decisions, right? Oh, if he only called this play, if he hadn't overthrown that ball, they're typically doing it on Monday mornings, but they're not the ones in the field. They're looking at it with 20/20 hindsight. So the historians are Monday morning quarterbacking about what was intended and what Saruman might have done. That's what I mean by Monday morning quarterbacking.
That was a good job, Alan. You really knocked it out of the park.
Oh no, another sports analogy. Nice.
Now that we've got the sports analogies over with, we'll move to the battle itself, starting with a description of the geography and terrain in the area, most of which we skipped in the reading. And the key here is the flow of the River Isen.
That's right. Now closer to its source, which is in the Misty Mountains north of Isengard, it flows quickly, and that means it couldn't be crossed by an armored or mounted force. And we read a bit of that back in Book 3, Chapter 8, The Road to Isengard. They had passed into Nan Curanir, the Wizard's Vale. That was a sheltered valley open only to the south. Once it had been fair and green, and through it the Isen flowed, already deep and strong before it found the plains. For it was fed by many springs and lesser streams among the rain-washed hills, and all about it there had lain a pleasant, fertile land.
And the road that Gandalf, Théoden, etc. are taking north to Isengard is on the west side of the Isen. That is, they crossed at the fords.
Right.
The only other place that they could cross would be at Isengard itself, where a bridge had been built by Saruman. We learn that in the next chapter, Flotsam and Jetsam, where Merry is explaining what they saw. "There must have been 10,000 at the very least," said Merry. "They took an hour to pass out of the gates. Some went off down the highway to the fords, and some turned away and went eastward. A bridge has been built down there, about a mile away, where the river runs in a very deep channel. You could see it now if you stood up."
So all of that, the sort of the explanation of the way the river flows, the way Isengard is near its source and is really the only other place to cross, all that's to say that the fords are absolutely critical.
So it's fast up near its source and uncrossable. What about further down the river? The text tells us that the Isen turns west here. It falls by long slopes down into the low-lying coastlands and became deep and rapid.
Well, there you go. So it's going to be impossible to cross further south. Now, picking up where we started reading, we learned that it is only here in the flatter lands of the Gap of Rohan, where the Isen would naturally slow down, that it becomes possible for a force to move across the river. Now, the river actually splits into two little arms around a small island. That word, Eyot, I think we pronounced it Eyot before. It's actually just pronounced like 8. It's just 8.
Oh,
and it simply means a small island, especially an island in a river or lake. There's also a small shelf there made up of all the smaller rocks that have been carried down from the river's source. This is really the only place where the river has slowed down and isn't deep, so it is where an army would cross.
And with that understanding in mind, the text also points out the advantageous position that Saruman finds himself in up in Isengard.
That's right.
He can split his forces to go down both the west and east shores of the Isen, attacking the fords from both sides simultaneously.
That's right. So even if the western side were defeated by Théodred and his troops, they could retreat up the road to Isengard. But if Saruman's forces won, well, Théodred and his forces would have to retreat back over the fords into the waiting army on the eastern shore.
Not great.
No.
The text expands on what we mentioned earlier. They can't go south or west from the fords, in part because of the geography of the river, but also, as the footnote points out, because of geopolitics.
That's right. See, after the Isen turns west, the land south of the Isen, well, it's technically part of Rohan until the Adorn River, right? We looked at that recently in Cirion and Eora when we got the entire bounds of Rohan. But as the footnote points out, that's only nominally part of Rohan.
The people in that region were, the footnote explains, largely of mixed blood with the Dunlendings who had occupied it for a long time. We read, their loyalty to Edoras was weak. The slaying of their lord, Freka, by King Helm was still remembered. Indeed, at this time, they were more disposed to side with Saruman, and many of their warriors had joined Saruman's forces.
Now, Helm Hammerhand killed Freka with that one punch, all the way back in 2754, so they have a long memory in these parts. But the footnote also reiterates what we have been saying about the geography, pointing out there was no way into their land from the west except for bold swimmers. So probably not heavily armed and armored cavalry then.
Not so much. Unless they're Michael Phelps. They're not making
There
it.
you go.
Now, the text smooth... Now, guys, that was an Olympian. I'm expecting you guys to know.
Oh, no, we did another sports thing, didn't we?
I did another sports thing. That was Michael Phelps, famous Olympian, won a lot of gold medals for swimming.
Yeah, I think it still holds the record or tied. He broke Spitz's record, right? Yeah, for most gold medals.
I think so. He's got a bajillion medals.
Yeah, something like that.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Gazillion, bajillion, somewhere in that range.
Yeah. Now, the text smoothly segues into the attack itself, explaining that while Rohan certainly expected an attack from Saruman, he did move sooner than he'd hoped or planned for. Théodred had been warned about a buildup of Saruman's troops. They're gathering right at the gates, so clearly getting ready for an attack.
Now, his scouts explained that, look, they're mostly on the west side of the Isen. But hey, Théodred is just as aware of the geographical advantages we are. He leaves some levied infantry on both sides of the ford. And just as a reminder, folks, a levy is a military force raised, that means levied, typically from a local conscription, in this case, the Westfold.
Yeah, these are unlikely to be professional soldiers like Théodred's cavalry force.
Yeah.
This is more like farmer soldiers, though hopefully reasonably prepared and equipped.
One would hope, yeah.
He also leaves what the text says is 3 companies of cavalry, along with their additional mounts, on the east side of the ford.
Now, the text keeps using the word companies, but I have to say I'm hearing Eoreds. Historically, companies of cavalry have been around 100 to 150. We know that a full Éored is 120 riders, including the commander. So company and Éored are virtually interchangeable here. He then takes the bulk of his forces, 8 companies plus a company of archers. So that's over 1,000 men. And he heads west across the fords and turns up north up the road that goes along the west side of the Isen with the intent to destroy Saruman's army before it can get going. It's a good idea, it sounds like, right?
It sounds like, but it would seem his scouts had given Théodred an incomplete picture.
Yeah.
Alan, what comes next?
They were already on the march when Théodred set out. Some 20 miles north of the fords, he encountered their vanguard and scattered it with loss. But when he rode on to attack the main host, the resistance stiffened. The enemy was in fact in positions prepared for the event, behind trenches manned by pikemen, and Théodred, in the leading Éored, was brought to a stand and almost surrounded, for new forces hastening from Isengard were now outflanking him upon the west. He was extricated by the onset of the companies coming up behind him, but as he looked eastward, he was dismayed. It had been a dim and misty morning, but the mists were now rolling back through the gap on a breeze from the west. And away east of the river he descried other forces now hasting towards the fords, though their strength could not be guessed. He at once ordered a retreat. This the riders, well trained in the maneuver, managed in good order and with little further loss. But the enemy was not shaken off or long outdistanced, for the retreat was often delayed, when the rear guard under Grimbold was obliged to turn at bay and drive back the most eager of their pursuers. When Théodred gained the fords, the day was waning. He set Grimbold in command of the garrison of the west bank, stiffened with 50 dismounted riders. The rest of his riders and all the horses he at once sent across the river, save his own company. With these on foot he manned the 8, to cover the retreat of Grimbold if he was driven back. This was barely done when disaster came. Saruman's eastern force came down with unexpected speed. It was much smaller than the western force, but more dangerous. In its van were some Dunlending horsemen and a great pack of the dreadful Orcish wolf riders, feared by horses. Behind them came 2 battalions of the fierce Uruks, heavily armed but trained to move at great speed for many miles. The horsemen and wolf riders fell on the horse herds and picketed horses and slew or dispersed them. The garrison of the east bank, surprised by the sudden assault of the massed Uruks, was swept away, and the riders that had just crossed from the west were caught still in disarray, and though they fought desperately, they were driven from the fords along the line of the Isen with the Uruks in pursuit. Oh, this is a bad start.
Now, the problem with relying on messages from scouts is that the circumstances often change in the time that it takes to receive their reports, then act on them. And here, Saruman's forces are no longer mustering near the gates of Isengard. They're properly on the march.
That's right, which is why Théodred and his 9 total companies encountered the lead elements of Saruman's army a little more than halfway from the fords to Isengard. Mm-hmm.
Now, if we go back to Book 3, Chapter 8, as they're making their way to Isengard, Legolas asks how far it is from where they are, and Gandalf answers, "About 15 leagues as the crows of Saruman make it," said Gandalf. "5 from the mouth of the Deeping Combe to the fords, and 10 more from there to the gates of Isengard."
All right, then. 10 leagues from the fords to the gates of Isengard. A league is 3 miles, so 30 miles from the fords. And the text here says some 20 miles north of the fords is where Théodred encountered the vanguard. So 2/3 of the way to Isengard.
Not surprisingly, his large mounted force made quick work of Saruman's vanguard, but he runs into a real problem after that.
Well, he sure does. Not only is the main force significantly stronger than the vanguard, you expect that, but they are ready for a cavalry charge. They've dug trenches. They've equipped their forces with pikemen. This is not an army that was going down expecting to engage in battle at the fords. This was an army setting forth with the purpose of luring cavalry into an attack. Now, I'm sure most of you can picture trenches and, with pikemen in it, but let's talk about a pike. It isn't just a spear or some other weapon with a bit of reach. These are 16 to 18 foot long, typically. Really, really long. They're made of ash because of their length. They needed to be of strong wood to prevent sagging. At least they were often made of ash. They needed to be made of some sort of really strong wood. And they were equipped with a spear point at the end. Basically, a force equipped with these is specifically an anti-cavalry force, and they're prepared in dug trenches. That's pretty insane. They're already ready for this.
Yeah. Aside from the dug trenches, this reminds me of the movie Braveheart. They do that one cavalry charge against them, and they wait till the last minute to pull up the pikes. And they are about this length. So I think aside from the trenches, you can think Braveheart when you think of this moment.
Yeah. Or you think a little bit of the 2 towers in the Jackson films with Gandalf leading the charge of the horsemen down to save Helm's Deep. And you see that they're ready with their pikes. But then Gandalf does the thing that he does with like
the sunlight
sun.
And
they turn like trolls. It kind of helps. Trolls in daylight. Well, orcs in daylight. They lift up their arms and
just like
useless. Just hold those things, point them down. You can look up all you want, but keep them pointed.
Right? Yeah. Just hold it in the same spot, and you're good.
So I'm trying to figure this out. The Isengard force, did they have scouts of their own? I mean, Or maybe the vanguard held up the force long enough to dig the trenches. Now, that seems unlikely. This seems like a pretty high level of preparedness and tactics from a force that, let's be honest, isn't usually known for tactical complexity or thinking things through beyond kill men, smash, you know. So what do you think? Do you think that they scouted them out? What do you think was going on here? Did they just assume we're going to be attacked, so let's prepare defensively first?
Yeah, I think, especially if they were confident that their numbers would be underestimated, then they've got to think, okay.
Yeah, they got 10,000, right?
The horsemen are going to have a better advantage not fighting in the water.
Well, yeah, that's true.
On horseback. So, yeah, I think they took an educated guess, and maybe they thought, like, worst case scenario, we build a bunch of unnecessary trenches.
Yeah,
and then we
that's true.
Continue marching later. But, like, the risk reward is much higher for digging the trenches than not.
That's a fair point. I also wonder now that we also have an understanding of what happens on the east side, if they were there to prevent, let's say, the retreat. They were manning the fords, and they're just manning the fords, pointing outwards west and east. Force comes down the east side. The Rohirrim retreat over the fords, but go north to go attack Isengard. Like, hey, well, now that they've come down here to attack us, we're going to go up the northern road to attack Isengard now that they've been emptied. And then lo and behold, they run into this. It could have been that.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting. Like, I don't know that they scouted this out. I mean, we do see that this army makes a lot of mistakes when they attack Helm's Deep. They make some significant errors that cost them that battle.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know, but I like that. You're right. It's risk reward. Like, hey, worst case scenario, we've dug some unnecessary holes, and I don't think anybody there is going to be complaining to their union boss.
Right.
They were forced to do
they made us
unnecessary
dig
labor.
these stupid holes, and then,
All right, we're killing you now. Next.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So not only have they dug trenches and equipped the right weapons to fight a cavalry charge, the reinforcements still coming from Isengard, and remember the gates are just 10 miles to the north, are now coming around and flanking Théodred and his leading Éored, that's 120 men again, to his west.
That's right. Now, fortunately, his other companies arrive and get him out of this place. You can't park there, sir. I mean, we got to get him out of there. Get him out of there. Yeah.
But as they're pulling back from this conflict, he looks across the Isen, and thanks to a change in the wind, he can see across the river.
Not that what he sees is a good thing. No, he sees some of Saruman's forces going down the east side of the river towards the ford. So he wisely calls a retreat. And of course, they're experienced riders. They're able to pull this retreat off without much loss, right? They know how to do this.
Yeah. But Saruman's forces chase the retreat and harry them, which causes the rear guard company under Grimbold's leadership to turn and drive them off. This slows down the retreat as a whole.
It does, but once again, we have an important rear guard action in Tolkien. I mean, how many times have we talked about the importance of rear guard actions? Now, the day is almost over, right? It says the day is waning by the time Théodred gets back to the fords. Now, we don't know the timing of the previous moves, though it's relatively safe to assume the scouting report was no earlier than daybreak, because how would you see the troops massing unless it was daybreak? Scouts come back probably very early in the morning, so it's been an all-day sort of thing. Grimbold, having proven himself and his riders in the rear guard, is put in charge of the west bank of the fords. Now, the text says that he's been reinforced by 50 dismounted riders. I want your opinion, Matt. Are these riders strategically dismounted to fight on foot because of the terrain, right? I mean, they're there at the ford, so like you said, they're not going to fight in the river on their horses. Or are these riders who lost their mounts when charging those pikes in trenches earlier?
Yeah, I can't imagine the survival rate is very high if you've lost your steed in a pike incident.
That's a fair point. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
I kind of always assumed that they had lost their mounts and that they would naturally be toward the back of the retreat because they're unmounted.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I don't know. Would there be any advantage to like purposely unmount it? It seems sacrilegious for the Rohirrim to like.
Well, depending on how you're going to fight.
dismount.
If you know that you're going to be fighting an infantry force, so a cavalry force is going to do better against infantry if the cavalry is on the move, right?
Right.
You want the
of course,
cavalry
yeah.
charging a stationary infantry. You don't want a moving infantry charging a stationary cavalry.
Yes. Fair
So
enough.
I think that might be why you would dismount them, is if they're
Mhm.
fighting a defensive battle at
Yeah.
the ford, and also where the terrain would be a problem because you don't want the horses getting mired
Right.
in the mud or anything like that, as we
Yeah,
saw in Rings of Power.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't charge right into the mud.
No, bad idea. So I don't know. These could be a mix of both. I mean, I have a feeling that's really what it is riders who have survived on foot, maybe by fighting in Grimbold's rear guard action, but also some who are being taken off their horses in order to fight effectively in that set of circumstances, defensive battle at the fords. I don't know. We'll have to find out.
So Théodred sends the rest of his forces across to the east side to handle this oncoming army, while he stays on the small island to be the rear guard for Grimbold if he needs to retreat.
Just going to call out that rear guard action again. That's just what I do.
Yeah.
We see it all the time. And now that I'm thinking
Yeah.
about it, it's like, wow, these are constantly happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, preparations in place as much as could be when disaster strikes.
Yeah.
Saruman's forces on the east side have arrived quicker than anticipated. And yes, it was a smaller force than the one they hit on the west side, but the text says it's more dangerous, partly because it's so mobile, including horsemen from Dunland and orcs riding wolves.
Now, these latter troops especially terrify their horses because, as the footnote explains, at need, they would pass with reckless ferocity through any gaps in companies of horsemen, slashing at the bellies of the horses. So, yeah, this is not something that the horses are cool with. They are terrified of these orc wolf riders. Now, these wolf riders were typically used not to attack a cavalry unit, but to chase down retreating foes or wipe out small isolated groups of soldiers. They were not a heavy cavalry force designed to charge any units.
Now, behind the Dunland horsemen and the orc wolf riders came 2 full battalions of fierce and powerful Uruks.
That's a lot. I mean, look, Tolkien does not give us numbers again. He spoke about companies. Now he's speaking about battalions. A battalion is always bigger than a company. It's usually made up of several companies. In modern armies, a battalion is around 1,000 troops, so this could easily be 2,000 Uruks.
Yeah, and these Uruks, just like we see in the films, are trained to move at great speed for many miles.
Yeah.
So they're a perfect infantry force to accompany what is essentially a light cavalry.
That's true. Yeah, the Dunland horsemen and the orc wolf riders. That speed proves fatal for the Rohirrim that are on the eastern side of the ford. The extra horses, remember they talked about the horse herd and then the additional war horses that they brought. All those horses are either killed or driven away, and the entire garrison that was there was swept away.
It was so bad that even the forces sent over the fords by Théodred to reinforce that side got caught and weren't able to organize and fight.
And that's a large amount, too. Remember, he went up with, I think it was 8 companies plus a company of archers. We know that Grimbold and his company were left behind along with 50 more. So maybe that's the remnants of one Éored. He and his own unit stay on top of the 8 in the river. So that's 1, 2, 3 units, 3 Éoreds. So we're looking at least 500 troops, that maybe 600, depending on how many got killed in the initial fight. But at least 500, one would assume. They were not able to organize. And so they get swept away by the assault.
Yeah. And they retreated from the fords down the riverside, so southwards on the east side of the Isen, while the Uruks chased them down.
And we'll find out what happens to them later on. Now, folks, if you're enjoying the Prancing Pony podcast, please consider supporting the show by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. This is what gives me the time and resources to work on making this show better every season and hopefully every episode. When you join, you get the best Discord community around. That includes live episode recordings, hangouts every month. You get episode postscripts. You can get ad-free episodes, free merch, and more.
You can also become part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes, or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and join the fellowship of the podcast.
And of course, you can also help us out by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify. And please recommend us to your friends. In the meantime, you know what I'm not going to recommend to my friends? Defending the Fords of Isen. I think it's a tough job. But Matt, would you tell us what happens when Elfhelm arrives?
As soon as the enemy had gained possession of the eastern end of the fords, there appeared a company of men, or orcmen, evidently dispatched for the purpose, ferocious, mail-clad, and armed with axes. They hastened to the Eyot and assailed it from both sides. At the same time, Grimbold on the west bank was attacked by Saruman's forces on that side of the Isen. As he looked eastward, dismayed by the sounds of battle and the hideous orc cries of victory, he saw the axemen driving Théodred's men from the shores of the Eyot toward the low knoll in its center, and he heard Théodred's great voice crying, "To me, Eorlingas." At once Grimbold, taking a few men that stood near him, ran back to the Eyot. So fierce was his onset from the rear of the attackers that Grimbold, a man of great strength and stature, clove his way through, till with two others he reached Théodred standing at bay on the knoll. Too late. As he came to his side, Théodred fell, hewn down by a great orc man. Grimbold slew him and stood over the body of Théodred, thinking him dead. And there he would himself soon had died, but for the coming of Elfhelm. Elfhelm had been riding in haste along the horse road from Edoras, leading 4 companies in answer to Théodred's summons. He was expecting battle, but not yet for some days. But near the junction of the horse road with the road down from the deeping, his outriders on the right flank reported that 2 wolf riders had been seen abroad in the fields. Sensing that things were amiss, he did not turn aside to Helm's Deep for the night as he had intended, but rode with all speed towards the fords. The horse road turned northwest after its meeting with the deeping road, but again bent sharply west when level with the fords, which it approached by a straight path of some 2 miles long. Elfhelm thus heard and saw nothing of the fighting between the retreating garrison and the Uruks south of the fords. The sun had sunk and light was failing when he drew near the last bend in the road, and there encountered some horses running wild, and a few fugitives who told him of the disaster.
All right, well, going back to the beginning of the passage you read, clearly this was the plan all along. Isolate Théodred, right? You know, we've got a situation now where it's just Théodred and 1 company of men on the island in the river. So as soon as Saruman's forces secured the east side of the fords with many Uruks chasing down the garrison, remember, we see an elite company of troops that the chronicler believes had a single mission: to find and kill Théodred.
They're well-armed and well-armored and are described as ferocious.
That's right. And the text says that they're men or orc men. But since we later see that a great orc man is featured, I think we can assume that these are either half-orcs or a mix of men and half-orcs.
Yeah, and they hurried straight to the small island and attacked it from both sides, clearly solely focused on killing the heir to the throne.
That's right. Now, at the same time, and not coincidentally, I'm guessing, Grimbold and his forces, that's the garrison that was originally left there, plus Grimbold and his people, along with 50 unmounted cavalry, are attacked by the forces of Saruman that still remained on the west side. I mean, they'd been harassing the retreat earlier, so it's not a surprise that this force is here on the west side so quickly.
Yeah, and we switch briefly to Grimbold's perspective, seeing the attack on Théodred from the west side of the fords as he looks back to the east. And he sees these axe-wielding half-orcs advancing toward the small hill in the middle of the island. Then he hears his lord, the king's son, cry out, "To me, Eorlingas."
So Grimbold does as he's commanded, right? I mean, to me, Eorlingas means what it says. So he heads over there, takes a few men, races towards Théodred, and he attacks these elite forces from the rear because they're surrounding Théodred. So you combine the fact that he's attacking from the rear with the fierceness of his attack and his own nature as a man of great strength and stature, and no wonder he makes it through the enemy to Théodred's side.
Yeah. But unfortunately, only in time to see him struck down by this giant half-orc.
Oh,
and
man.
Grimbold kills the half-orc, and he stands over Théodred to protect his body, fully expecting that he would die here.
Absolutely. This is where I stand. This is where I'm going to die. I'm going to die protecting the body of my lord. Man, this is some powerful stuff right here. I mean, this has a real Beowulfian feel to it, a real northern feel to it. I almost think a little bit of Beorhthelm's son, and the battle there at Malden.
Yep.
You know, there's some real imagery here. Also, what a line that was. Simple sentence, 2 words.
Too late. Yeah.
Man, that hits like a ton of bricks, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, the other hero of tonight's action shows up, and that's Elfhelm. And yes, that's the same Elfhelm who almost certainly knew Éowyn was riding with his men, the same Elfhelm who tripped over the sleeping Merry. It's a good guy.
And it turns out Elfhelm's got some pretty good battlefield instincts. You know, he'd been hurrying along the road from Edoras to the Fords as he'd been summoned by Théodred, presumably for this very fight that they didn't think would happen so quickly.
Right. Now, he was leading a sizable force of 4 companies. Again, I'm thinking 4 Éodred, so just shy of 500 men. And he's near the split in the road that would have taken him to Helm's Deep.
Yeah, and that was the original plan, to go to Helm's Deep, rest his men overnight, then link up with Théodred in the morning. But his scouts reported seeing a couple of orc wolf riders out in the fields, and he knows something's not right here. So
yeah, that's a bad sign right there.
That's not a common thing to see, or a desirable thing to see, I should say.
No.
So he heads as fast as he can for the Fords.
That's right. Now, if we go back to the bit with Gandalf explaining how far it was from the Deeping Combe to Isengard, he said it's 5 leagues from the Deep to the Fords. That's 15 miles. But this is only the road that leads to the Deep, so clearly it's a lot less. It's a very short sprint.
Yeah, but it is more than 2 miles because the road is said to cut northwest first, then go straight west for the final 2 miles to the Fords.
That's fair. But because of that, he didn't see the forces that were retreating and being chased by the Uruks. And in a way, that's a good thing, because if he had seen Rohirrim being chased by Uruks going down south on the east side of the Isen, he might have gone after them to chase and rescue them, and Grimbold would have died. But instead, Elfhelm goes straight to the Fords into the setting sun.
And as he gets closer, he gets a few updates from retreating soldiers and steps on the gas, ordering his 500 men to charge as they approach the east bank of the Ford.
That's right.
Now, let's just get right into it and find out what happens next.
Absolutely. It was the turn of the Isengarders to be surprised. They heard the thunder of hooves and saw coming like black shadows against the darkening east a great host, as it seemed, with Elfhelm at its head, and beside him a white standard borne as a guide to those that followed. Few stood their ground. Most fled northwards, pursued by 2 of Elfhelm's companies. The others he dismounted to guard the east bank, but at once, with the men of his own company, rushed to the 8. The axemen were now caught between the surviving defenders and the onslaught of Elfhelm, with both banks still held by the Rohirrim. They fought on, but before the end were slain to a man. Elfhelm himself, however, sprang up towards the knoll, and there he found Grimbold fighting 2 great axemen for possession of Théodred's body. One Elfhelm at once slew, and the other fell before Grimbold. They stooped then to lift the body, and found that Théodred still breathed. But he lived only long enough to speak his last words. "Let me lie here, to keep the Fords till Éomer comes." Night fell. A harsh horn sounded, and then all was silent. The attack on the west bank ceased, and the enemy there faded away into the dark. The Rohirrim held the Fords of Isen, but their losses were heavy, not least in horses. The king's son was dead, and they were leaderless, and did not know what might yet befall. When, after a cold and sleepless night, the gray light returned, there was no sign of the Isengarders, save those many that they left dead upon the field. Wolves were howling far off, waiting for the living men to depart. Many men, scattered by the sudden assault of the Isengarders, began to return, some still mounted, some leading horses recaptured. Later in the morning, most of Théodred's riders that had been driven south down the river by a battalion of Black Uruks came back battle-worn but in good order. They had a like tale to tell. They came to a stand on a low hill and prepared to defend it. Though they had drawn off part of the attacking force of Isengard, retreat south unprovisioned was in the end hopeless. The Uruks had resisted any attempt to burst eastwards and were driving them towards the now hostile country of the Dunlandish West March. But as the riders prepared to resist their assault, though it was now full night, a horn was sounded, and soon they discovered that the enemy had gone. They had too few horses to attempt any pursuit, or even to act as scouts, so far as that would have availed by night. After some time, they began cautiously to advance north again, but met no opposition. They thought that the Uruks had gone back to reinforce their hold on the fords, and expected there to meet in battle again. And they wondered much to find the Rohirrim in command. It was not till later that they discovered whither the Uruks had gone. So ended the first battle of the Fords of Isen.
There it is.
There it is. The first battle of the Fords of Isen's in the books.
Yeah. Which, in case you guys haven't picked up on, that means there is a second battle of the Fords of Isen, because that's the clue when they say the first.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Now, if Théodred and the Rohirrim were surprised earlier, now it's the forces of Saruman who are seeing the day slip away.
As an aside, we've seen Tolkien do this sort of thing masterfully before, right? We have one side winning and then something suddenly happens that benefits the other side and so on. It gets this real back and forth, and sometimes it happens multiple times in the same battle. To me, it seems to show a genuine understanding of the flow of battle and how it really can switch back and forth from one side to the other. Yeah.
Now, coming back to the text, these half-orcs, Uruks, and Dunlandings are more than a bit dismayed by the onset of Elfhelm.
Wouldn't we all? I mean, the thunder of hooves. A cavalry charge has got to be one of the most terrifying sights for an unprepared infantry to face. I can't even conceive of what that would be like.
And as the sun goes down in the west, these foes are looking towards the darkening east and see what appears to be a huge force of riders, which, as you said earlier, Alan, it's close to 500 men. Mm-hmm. And they're led by Elfhelm and his standard bearer, using a white flag for visibility, I'd guess. Not surprisingly, their units break, with most fleeing to the north, followed by half of Elfhelm's force, which would be about 2 companies.
Yeah, about 240 guys. And of course, they're going to flee to the north. That's where Isengard is. Now, Elfhelm has most of the rest dismount to fight on foot, which suggests what we talked about earlier, that in this situation, if you're going to be fighting a defensive battle at the fords, you're going to get off and be dismounted. While he takes his own company to the small island where Grimbold has just reached Théodred. So Elfhelm had a company and was leading 4 companies. So we could see this as 5, but it's more likely that it was he and his company plus 3 more. So in that case, he's got 2 companies chasing the enemy north, and that's on the east side of the Isen. He's got 1 company dismounted to protect the east bank, and 1 company with him to the island.
Now, these elite forces that had attacked Théodred are in a tough spot. They're caught between Grimbold and the other defenders and this new and strong force attacking from the east. And they couldn't flee, so they fought and died to a man.
That's right, or to an orc, as the case may be. Or to an orc man, really.
Or an orc man.
Now, Elfhelm gets to the top of that small hill where Grimbold is fighting to protect Théodred's body, and they each get a kill before tending to the king's son.
And he's actually still alive, but barely. And only long enough to speak his final words. He says he wants to be left here to guard the fords until Éomer arrives.
I love that. It goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the episode. These two are very close. They're brothers, and they feel that. And even at this very last moment of his life, he is thinking about Éomer. Now, of course, Éomer is out and about. He does not know about this attack. This is happening the night of February 25th. And 2 days later, before news of this attack gets to Edoras, Éomer will take his Théodred in search of the orc band that has come into Rohan from the Emyn Muil. So he won't know until far too late.
Until he gets back, Now, Théodred dies, night falls, and there's the sound of an enemy horn, followed by total silence.
Yeah.
The attack on the east side was scattered by the arrival of Elfhelm. The attack on the west side has ended with what appears to be a retreat.
Now, sure, Rohan still holds the Fords. You win. But
Yeah.
at what cost, right? Not only have they lost men, but they've lost horses. That is a heavy price for them. I mean, that's exactly how they fight. They have paid a heavy, heavy toll.
Yeah, but more than that, of course, the king's son is dead. Now they don't have a leader, and they have no clue to what's going to happen next.
I would argue they have at least two leaders, Elfhelm and Grimbold. They're just not official leaders yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what the text is saying. They're leaderless in that sense because Théodred is
Right.
dead. They don't have a marshal, though Elfhelm ends up becoming a marshal. Yeah, I mean, clearly they have men who can lead, and these two have made some good decisions. Now, the next morning, which is February 26th, also the day of the breaking of the fellowship and the death of Boromir, the Rohirrim wake up and take stock of the situation.
Yeah, they find only the dead of Saruman's forces, although they hear the wolves far off.
Yeah.
And some of the Rohirrim that had been driven off were coming back, some with horses, so that's some help.
That's right, especially the ones that are coming back with extra horses. And we find out then what happened to those riders that had been driven south along the river the day before. Remember then we read the riders that had just crossed from the west were caught still in disarray. And though they fought desperately, they were driven from the fords along the line of the Isen with the Uruks in pursuit.
Yeah, and they'd come back, the text says, battle-worn, but intact.
And that's better than the alternative. It turns out they'd reached the point where they knew, look, we've drawn off part of their forces from attacking the fords, but we cannot keep going south. We simply don't have the provisions to go through Gondor and take the long road home.
Yeah, it'd be a very long road home.
months and months, and they have no provisions. They'd starved.
Yeah, they would miss the rest of the War of the Ring,
yes,
basically.
they would. Mm-hmm.
Now, they'd been driven by the Uruks toward the West March, which we talked about earlier as now being very Dunlandish. No loyalty to Edoras. They still remember good old Fat Freka.
I know, and why you remember him in a good light, I don't understand, but okay.
Right, yes, yeah. So they finally take their stand on a small hill, ready to die in the middle of the night, but then the horn blows and the enemy retreated.
Now, normally, you would think the Rohirrim would do something about that. They would harry the retreat or at least try to scout it out, but they didn't have the men to chase them down or even follow them, so they slowly made their way up very cautiously towards the fords, and were more than a bit surprised to find that Rohan was still in control and not fighting the Uruks.
And thus ends the first battle of the Fords of Isen.
Which again suggests there will be a second battle of the Fords of Isen.
Stay tuned, ladies and gents.
Now, they thought that the Uruks had gone back to reinforce their hold on the fords and expected there to meet in battle again. And they wondered much, I mean, I would too, to find Barlaman in command. It was not till later that they discovered whether the mailbag had gone. Matt, what does Barlaman have for us tonight besides more awful segues?
So Barlaman's got a note here from Alice from Texas, who says, I think a lot of fans of Tolkien books like to point out changes they don't like when books are made into movies or TV shows. But are there any changes you think are actually good? Obviously, you know, I think I've said here on this podcast, you know, I much prefer like the book version of Gandalf versus the Witch King and Minas Tirith. Like that's one of my big ones.
And I much prefer the book version of Faramir.
Yeah. And like on the Faramir one, like I understand why. Like
I can understand it from a cinematic standpoint, but I'm like, don't you dare do Faramir dirty like that. I mean, he's my favorite character. You've gone and turned him into a, you know, I need to please my dad so much, I'm going to take the ring back to what?
But I like that he gets to where he needs to be by the end, I will say. Yeah.
You know, I'll still disagree only because they make that out to be a Sam thing. Like Sam helps Faramir to be the man he was meant to be. No,
I see.
To me, Faramir is just who he is. I mean, this is the guy who says, were I to find this thing on the side of the road and I could save Minas Tirith, I alone, I would still not do it, right?
It's a pretty great, which we get like a variation of that. Like later in Return of the King, like the line, like I'm glad that they worked the line in because I do love that line so much.
But this was about things we like, not things we don't like. So I'm going to stop talking about that. Things we liked in adaptations. Hinder me, thou fool. No, I did not like that. Sorry. I'm actually trying to cast my mind back to those early adaptations and think if there's anything in the Rankin and Bass Hobbit or the Bakshi Lord of the Rings that I liked.
Yeah. So what I was, you know, kind of building up to that.
Yeah.
Was like, we do kind of think changes that we don't like for whatever reason, like that's where our mind goes. But as I was thinking about this, there's some interesting ones that I actually do really like. One from the Hobbit films is from a filmmaking perspective is how Bilbo understands the spiders when he puts the ring on.
Yes, that was good.
Like that,
that's fair.
Because going into those films, I was like, how are they going to do that? Because they don't have any other talking animals. The eagles don't talk. And I'm like, how are they just going to have these spiders randomly talk? And I thought that was really clever how they made that work.
I'll go back to the Hobbit movies as well. I'll say that I really did like the introduction of the dwarves as individual characters. We didn't get that in the books.
No.
This is no disrespect to Tolkien. He was just doing his job. It was not a story that we needed to. When you've got characters that aren't going to do anything, you don't need to really introduce them as individual characters. So true. I get why he didn't tell us every single thing about every one of these other dwarves. But I did like, since the movie was going to do more in depth and be longer than it needed to be, they had to give the dwarves some individual personality, and I thought they did a good job with that.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why I like the first one the best, too, is I think it does the best job of giving us individual traits of each of the dwarves.
Yeah, I think the hard part, now that I realize this, the hard part about this question from Alice is that our brains are kind of tending to think of Tolkien's work as so good that any change is going to be bad. And so it's much easier to say, I don't like this change, I don't like that change, I don't like this change.
Yeah.
Instead, I like when they really stuck to the lore. Like, I really like when they did this exact thing right, but that's not a change. So trying to find things that were changes that we like.
So I've got to change. Okay. So this one is kind of a halfway, and then I'll get to some outright changes here in a bit, but
all right.
Moving Gandalf's line to Moria instead of Bag End about pity and Gollum.
Yes. Okay.
I thought that was a great change because we get that wonderful, iconic line in Bag End, like half a book from Gollum even entering the picture. And it's great. You're talking about Gollum, like it makes sense to like learn that lesson, but the way it hits, when it hits in the films, right before we lose Gandalf, like it's masterful how
it is.
Fit that where they fit that. It was such a good call, I think.
I think so too. I'm going to add another one from that film, and that is, though in this case now I actually have to credit Bakshi a little bit, and it was the idea of a prologue to set the stage. I do love reading the books is a wonderful experience, and starting out at A Long Expected Party makes perfect sense. But I do really admire how both Bakshi and Jackson created prologues that gave us enough backstory to get invested in the story immediately.
Yeah.
I'm not nuts about the way Bakshi executed. I thought it was pretty choppy and kind of not so great, but the idea was good. And it's clear that inspired Jackson to do the
springboard.
Same.
Yeah.
And he created a prologue that was really, really ideal.
Oh, it's incredible.
It is. It's really, it sucked me in immediately. And the thing I liked about it is that it would take anybody who'd never read the books and immediately give them enough to care. And it was so well done.
And the masterful thing, and not to get too much into, I don't care to like pit adaptations against each other, but I think it's helpful in comparison. One of the things that I've often said is you look at the Lord of the Rings prologue versus like the Rings of Power season 1 prologue.
Yeah.
And on the surface, you have like, okay, we've got this big dark villain, we've got this setup and everything, but one of them works in a way I think the other doesn't, in that the Lord of the Rings prologue, every character that you meet, every event that happens is going to have echoes throughout the entire trilogy.
Yeah.
Whereas Rings of Power, we focus on Morgoth, and it's like Morgoth isn't coming into this story.
No.
Like, no. And so like, there's these things.
Doors at night are locked, man.
Right. Yeah. Where like they check the boxes of like, okay, epic villain, great evil,
trees,
big
spider,
epic battles.
Yeah.
But these are things that don't really echo throughout the rest of the story.
Yeah. There's no callback to the Nirnaeth. There's no callback to the Hill of the Slain. Yeah. None of those other things that are sort of hinted at in the prologue.
And I mean, to credit where it's due, like the Lord of the Rings prologue is arguably the greatest prologue sequence
It's a masterpiece
of all time.
Yeah.
It is a masterpiece. So I can't harp too much on like, you didn't do as good of a job. Yeah.
He didn't do as good a job as perfection. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's a fair point. I mean, that really is an ideal prologue.
Yeah.
Oh, there are a couple other things I really actually did like. How about one? This is an interesting one.
Mhm.
It's a change that initially I did not like. I criticized this change. And
Okay.
Sean helped me kind of come around to a different position on this. And it's the presence of the elves at Helm's Deep.
Really?
Because it's
interesting.
Yeah, it's the only way really that they could show realistically that
Mhm.
the elves were as invested in this fight. We learn in the appendices that Lorien was assaulted and had to fight these battles at the edges of the wood. We know that Dale was attacked. We know that Erebor was attacked. This was a way to show that it wasn't just men that were being attacked by Sauron.
Yeah.
I think they kind of overplayed the hand a little bit. I'm not necessarily nuts about the way that change was executed.
Right.
But I think in hindsight, with the understanding of the fact that they couldn't show all that detail in the appendices,
Yeah.
that was really actually a pretty effective change in bringing that element of the story to the fore.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That's one that I'm not as upset about as a lot of people seem to be about the elves being at Helm's Deep. Like it's not a make or break for me. And it's
I mean, it was never like a major one for
Helm's
me.
Deep.
Yeah.
Helm's Deep is like the greatest battle ever committed to film. So I'm not gonna critique it because it's freaking amazing.
I still think the Battle of the Pelennor Fields might be a little better. I like them
That'd
both,
be an interesting debate one day.
It's maybe because I'm old and blind and can't stand watching a battle in the dark.
In the dark? Oh man. Yeah, the readers don't help with that one. But the
wow, thanks, Matt.
The survival rate of elves at Helm's Deep is not good, by the way.
No, it is not. It is not.
Here's one that I think I think there'll be some people who really cringe at me saying this.
Oh boy.
But Arwen replacing Glorfindel, I actually think is a great move. Like, not that I won't say that it's like an improvement over the book, but I think it's something that was a great move for an adaptation because at the end of the day, Glorfindel, as cool as he is, he's not going to have a lasting impact on the story. And Arwen, by the end, like she's the queen of Gondor at the end. Like we need to give a crap about why Aragorn cares about Arwen. We need to give a crap about her character and see why is she important to the story? And giving her an introduction that is meaningful and showing her as a quality character in her own right. I think sets her up well. And I think they just did a really good job of taking that opportunity to introduce a character that otherwise you would have had to tack on runtime to do. And it would have felt like
her.
It would have felt like extra tacked on stuff in Rivendell, whereas it was so economical and so smart the way that they said, okay, we're going to give Glorfindel his role and his horse to Arwen. And
Asphalot. You're right.
And let her do that. And then we also get one of the most compelling chases, that iconic chase.
The camera moves alone were phenomenal.
Yeah, it's so amazing. That's one that I love Glorfindel's story, especially when you factor in the Silmarillion and the
killing
reincarnation.
A Balrog.
Yeah, killing a Balrog and being reincarnated. It's so cool. I think he would be amazing to include in an Angmar adaptation.
Oh yes, in an Angmar adaptation, 100%. I want him in there.
Yeah, if an Angmar adaptation happens, bring in Glorfindel.
He better be there.
And let's
let's have him.
But for this case, I think replacing him with Arwen was the right call.
I'm going to say it made sense. I'm not going to cringe and say it was a bad choice on your part to mention it. I don't know that I'm going to say it was a change I really liked, though it was a change I definitely understood for the exact reasons you cited, right? Just cinematically, we had to care about this character because she was going to be Aragorn's love interest. We couldn't read about it in Appendix A15, right? I mean, we had to have that in the story. So I totally understood it. And I did like the way they executed it. I felt like they did that really well. I felt like she really carried that character strongly, carried that moment strongly. And like you said, the chase was just flat out epic. I'm going to end this section with one more, and it's actually related to what we talked about today with Théodred. In the books, of course, we don't see anything about Théodred's death. We don't, none of this is in the story. Just that, hey, it was only 5 days ago that we found out your son died.
Yeah.
I liked the edition. Now I'm trying to remember because I only watched the extended editions. I think it was only in the extended edition that we see Éomer discovering Théodred's body. I think that's only in the extended. That is correct.
Yep.
But it was also in the original. Did we not also get Éowyn's funeral song?
Yes, we did.
That may have, I can't remember if that was original or extended. I wonder if maybe the doors to the tomb closed and then it was cut. I don't remember now.
I think we did get it in the
I think we did in the original, in the theater. I seem to remember seeing it and being moved to tears. It was so beautiful. And of course, it's another example of wonderful Old English being brought in to Rohan. I think seeing the Cymbalmina on the mound as his body was being, all of that. And of course, the incredible moment for Barnard Hill.
Yeah.
When he weeps and it's just, no parent should have to bury their child.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And even though I can tease about joking and how Théoden wouldn't have said that, he would have said no father should have, because parents a French origin word and father is a German origin word, and Old English wouldn't have used that word, but whatever. Right. The moment cinematically hit me so hard and still does, even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And it's probably the moment in the films that conveys some of the most real emotion.
Yeah.
And it led to that. So I think the addition of Théodred's death and the funeral sequence and all of that was perhaps the change that I liked the most. And I'm glad that it ties it into the episode that we did today.
Yeah. And I will say, there's a lot of little moments too, to kind of wrap it, when you talk about that, because it's such a small moment. It's like a line of dialogue here and there that matches so well with the themes of what 100%.
Tolkien.
I mean, I think of Boromir when he dies in the books. It's sad, and Aragorn says, you've overcome and everything. But in the films, when he says, my brother, my captain, my king,
I know, rip my heart out. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or you bow to no one at the end of the Return of the King. These are things that, they just do. It's such a good job. When you have to sometimes double check yourself. Was that in the books, or am I
there are a few of those, aren't there?
There's a good number of those where it's is that line from the books? And that's the mark of a great adaptation right there, is when,
if you have to ask yourself that and you genuinely don't know. Yeah.
When you genuinely are wait, am I just remembering that from the films, or was that in the books? And there's a good number of those. So.
I don't want to be too hard on Rings of Power, but can I be honest with you and tell you there's not a lot of dialogue in that show where I say to myself, is that something I read in the appendices, or maybe
it's true.
Unfinished Tales? No.
I was thinking
they're doing a better job in season 2 of making it feel Tolkienian, I think, but not, they're nowhere still up to that level.
Yeah, I think I still think the high water mark for the show and season 2 was Celebrimbor saying, "Hear me, Shadow of Morgoth."
Yeah. So
hear now the dying words of Celebrimbor. That's the closest they've come.
That felt right there.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because that really was a moment.
Yes.
But
that's my hands down. Season 1, my favorite moment was the shot coming over the hill and seeing Tyrion and the two trees.
Yeah.
That was hands down that was
the
moment.
My heart stopped.
Yeah. But this one, season 2 actually had a moment because of the dialogue and the characters, and not just purely visuals.
Right.
So that was a big improvement, because I think in season 1, the one that I point to is Bronwyn, where she says, the light about from Sam,
about the Sam Star line. Yeah.
The Sam Star line. Yeah. And it's so the contrast there. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's definitely a Tolkien line because that's just way too beautiful than anything I've ever heard so far in season.
But that's
season
the
one.
thing is it stands out too much as being unlike the rest
there's
of the
no
dialogue.
confusion. There's no confusion for like it being
like,
a quote.
Where did this gem come from?
Right. Yeah, I think it is improving. And like I said, that Celebrimbor moment, I'll go back and just watch that scene because that scene is really good.
I will also say the scene with the Durins as Durin the Elder's about to take on the Balrog, there's some really strong dialogue there too. I can't recall it off the top of my head precisely, but of course it's not out of Tolkien. And that's the challenge. They're not adapting existing material.
Yeah.
And that does make it hard, in fairness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, we could go on forever on this stuff. In fact, we probably will. But for now, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please be sure to come back next week when we've had one battle of the Fords of Isen. Yes. What about second battle of the Fords of Isen? I don't think he knows about that, Pip.
I don't think he knows about that. Well, they're about to after next episode.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes, you're going to know soon enough.
Well, folks, Alan and I want to thank the members of Team PPP, editor Jordan Reynolds, Barlam and Becca Davis, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, graphic artist Megan Collins, and website guru Phil Dean.
Now, please take a minute to check out the prancingponypodcast.com. It's where you'll find show notes, outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings, our online storefront where you can get PPP merch, and that includes all the great episode artwork that Megan's been doing for the show over the last couple of seasons.
You'll also want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony Podcast is, after all, a podcast about the books, so if you're interested in a book we mention on the show, you'll find a link for it in our library. We do get a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase, and we thank you for that.
And we also want to thank our patrons at the Kier Dance contribution tier. I'll start with DeMay in Alaska, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Zaksu in Illinois, Sarah in New Jersey, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, Keith in Alabama, and Erica in Texas.
There's also Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, James in Massachusetts, Ann in Kentucky, Sean in New Jersey, Mason in California, Maureen from Massachusetts, Olivia in London, Robert in Arizona, Nick in Wisconsin, Lewis in South Carolina, Thomas in Germany, Craig in California, Bailey in Texas, Kevin in Massachusetts, Julie in Washington, Bruce in California, Joe in Maryland, Nathan in Arizona, and Kevin in Pennsylvania. Thank you all so very much for your support.
Indeed, thank you.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe now through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, please, your reinforcements for the Fords of Isen to Barlaman at theprancingponypodcast.com. Just make sure they're dismounted.
And if you want your voice literally heard, well, just send us audio of your question. Visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us. Please be sure to still email the question to Barlaman, though.
That's right. Now, even though Barlaman's been a lot more reliable lately, there is still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able. As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
This is the end. We are going. We are leaving now. Goodbye.